Okay, so are you ready to get a little uncomfortable today?
Always up for a challenge. Hit me.
All right, well, the question we're diving into today is this whole idea of success and whether it's really attainable for everyone or if is it more like a game rigged for folks born with certain advantages?
Ooh, yeah, I see where we're going with this. And yeah, the source material we've got for this deep dive is it's pretty eye-opening. It really digs into the idea of privilege and how it plays this often invisible role in shaping people's trajectories in life.
Yeah, and what's interesting is like we always hear this narrative of work hard and you'll succeed, you know? Like that's the American dream, right?
Right, right. The whole meritocracy thing. Like if
Yeah.
you just put in the effort, you'll climb the ladder and achieve all your goals.
Exactly, but this source is kind of throwing some shade on that whole concept.
Yeah, it is. It's saying that's a huge oversimplification. Like, yeah, hard work is definitely important, don't get me wrong, but it's not the whole story, not even close.
Okay, so then what the missing piece?
Yeah.
What else is going on here?
Well, the source uses this analogy of a foot race, which I think is really helpful. Imagine you've got a bunch of runners lined up, but some of them start miles ahead of the starting line.
Okay, so they're already getting a head start.
Exactly. And those runners who are starting ahead, they're not necessarily faster or more talented. They just happen to be born into circumstances that gave them a massive advantage right out the gate.
So it's not just about how fast you run, it's about where you start the race.
Precisely. And the source argues that this applies to success in life too. Some folks are starting way ahead because they've got these built-in advantage, things they inherited, not earned. And you know what these advantages, they go way beyond just money.
Okay, so we're not just talking about the trust fund kids. What other kinds of advantages does the source talk about?
All sorts of things. Things like family connections, access to top-notch education, even being part of a majority racial or social group. These can all give you a leg up without you even realizing it.
I mean, those things definitely make sense, but is it really like insurmountable? Like, can't people overcome those disadvantages if they just work hard enough?
That's the million-dollar question, right? And it's where things get really complicated because the source brings up this idea of systemic barriers.
Systemic barriers, what does that even mean?
Basically, it means there are these obstacles baked into the system itself, our institutions, our laws, even our unconscious biases that can make it way harder for some folks to succeed, no matter how talented or hardworking they are.
Can you give me a concrete example of that? Like, what does that actually look like in the real
Oh,
world?
absolutely. The source talks about this study where researchers send out identical resumes to employers. The only difference, some resumes had names that sounded stereotypically white and some had names that sounded black.
What happened?
The resumes with white-sounding names got way more callbacks for interviews. Like, it wasn't even close. And this wasn't some outlier study. This kind of bias pops up again and again in research.
So you're telling me that just having a certain kind of name can affect your chances of getting a job? That's messed up.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark example of how these systemic barriers can operate without people even realizing it. Like, the people doing the hiring might not even be consciously discriminating, but the system itself is tilted in a way that disadvantages certain groups.
So it's not just about individual bad apples. It's about the whole barrel being kind of rotten.
Exactly. And it's important to note that these barriers can take so many forms. We've got hiring discrimination, unequal access to quality education, lack of affordable housing, even things like implicit bias in healthcare.
Okay, so back to the whole success thing. If some people are facing these invisible barriers, how can we even define success fairly? Like, are we all even playing the same game here?
Yeah, that's a super insightful question, and the source really pushes us to reevaluate our whole definition of success. Like, is it really all about material wealth and climbing the corporate ladder? Or are there other ways to live a meaningful and fulfilling life?
So basically like flipping the script on what we consider winning at life.
Right. And it's not about saying that ambition or hard work are bad things. It's more about broadening our perspective and recognizing that there are multiple paths to a good life.
I like that. So what kind of alternative metrics does the source suggest we use?
Yeah.
If it's not all about money and status, then what?
Well, it talks about things like personal fulfillment, having a positive impact on your community, cultivating strong relationships, living in alignment with your values. It's about recognizing that success can be deeply personal and multifaceted, not just a one-size-fits-all definition.
That's such a refreshing perspective, and honestly, it takes a lot of the pressure off.
Exactly. And it allows us to celebrate different kinds of achievements, not just the ones that society typically rewards. Like maybe success for one person is becoming CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but for another person, it's starting a community garden or writing a book that inspires others.
Yeah. And maybe for someone else, it's simply being a present and loving parent.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that success is subjective and there's no single right answer.
So if we're trying to wrap our heads around this whole privilege thing and how it impacts success, what's the main takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the path to success is rarely a level playing field. Privilege plays a huge role, and we need to acknowledge that even if it makes us uncomfortable.
And it's not about pointing fingers or feeling guilty.
Right. It's about understanding the complexities of the system and using that awareness to advocate for a more equitable world.
So what can our listeners do? Like, what's one tangible thing they can do today to start becoming more aware of privilege?
That's a good question. Well, for starters, I'd say pay attention to who and what gets celebrated in our society. Who are the people we hold up as success stories, whose voices are amplified, and whose stories are often overlooked or marginalized? Just asking those questions can be a powerful starting point.
And also, like, take a look at your own life and think about the advantages you might have had that you didn't even earn.
Exactly. Like maybe you had access to a great education or grew up in a safe neighborhood or had family connections that opened doors for you. Acknowledging those privileges doesn't diminish your hard work. It just helps you see the bigger picture.
It's about recognizing that we're all part of this system and we all have a role to play in making it more just.
Exactly.
Well, this has definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive.
I agree.
Hopefully it's given our listeners some food for thought and some concrete steps they can take to start making a difference.
Absolutely. And remember, this conversation is just the beginning. Keep learning, keep challenging your assumptions, and keep pushing for a world where success is truly attainable for everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.